Today, what are we going to do? Obviously, we're going to pay tribute, aren't we? Have an affectionate farewell to Les. And we'll take a bit of time to remember and reflect, but also to celebrate his life. Celebrate. I think he'd like that. My name is Peter Graham. I just want to thank you from the outset for being chosen to conduct a celebration of his life. My condolences to Les's family. That's you. That's you. That's you. You're his family. Hillman, you told me that Les has no other family, a sole survivor, an only child, no cousins. His wife Wendy passed away way back about the early 2000s. So you are his family. He lived and breathed, as everyone knows, horses, which is ironic because it was the lack of breathing that introduced his lifelong passion. You see, at 16 years of age, he had a serious bout of chronic asthma. So bad he was kept home from school for almost a year. He was housebound. And what he'd do at home, he'd listen to the races on the radio at 16. And by the age of 22, well, he bought his first brood mare. So today, and in a way, if you imagine this, Les is in that home straight with about a furlong to run. And it's like you are there at the finishing post cheering him on today. I think you'd be pretty grateful for your attendance here today. You'll all have your own memories of Les. And throughout the service here today, there'll be an opportunity for you to share some of those memories too. I know the President Stuart Lamont and directors of Thoroughbred Breeders New South Wales stated, we encourage those who wish to share stories and memories to do so. So we'll give most people an opportunity to do that. First of all, some condolences to Marjorie. Marjorie, you were his secretary, what, 30 years, nearabouts? You must have just started as a teenage girl. And to Hilma, you two became very close friends in the last 6 years, more so in the last couple of years. You used to love things like going out together with, to Moretti's, enjoying pizzas and Norton Street, and the movies too at the Palace Theatre too. Hilma, my sincere sympathies to you also. He really was a racing industry all-rounder, wasn't he? He dedicated his time and passion to several racing and breeding pursuits during his extensive career. A foundation member and also vice president of the New South Wales Racehorse Owners Association, he displayed a keen eye for thoroughbreds. And Peter V'landys said that Les was a passionate advocate for the industry, and he will be missed. Les has been a member of the New South Wales Breeders Association over 58 years, maybe longer. I haven't got the exact times. That's a long time. But I think as we are all here together, I wouldn't mind offering a little prayer of thanks to all those who've known Les and this man, his life, because we are thinking of him today, aren't we? And fondly remembering him. We are thankful for his span of years and gifts of character. Mind you, he's passed on much too young. We're thankful for his passion for those incredible thoroughbreds. We're thankful for his career as a bloodstock agent. Thankful for his searching the world for the best bloodlines. Thankful for his journalism skills. Blue Bloods, the magazine, Sportsman, the paper, just two of the many, many magazines and papers that he contributed to over the years. We give thanks for his many talents and his ability to encourage, and he did this, he would encourage young people in a new career or a new venture. We're thankful that he made time for the breeder with a single mare, just as he did for the big players in the game. We're thankful to have all been blessed to have him in our lives in some way. For this, we give thanks. Yes, the racing and breeding industry are mourning your passing today, Les. But we're also here to celebrate your life talk about you, the good times, the bad times, the funny times. And I thought it's only appropriate that Bob LaPointe should be our first speaker.
Max Presnell said recently, no fireball, but he could really find a winner. And my experience is that he really could. Yeah, I'll speak a lot about our mixed background, because when I got into the thoroughbred business, I had zero experience. So it was important that I found someone who was capable of giving me direction and leadership. He was a journalist, very unassuming, understated. He was a gentleman. He was a pedigree expert, conservative, and a really good bloke, as I said. I first met Les at John and Trish Muir's home at a cocktail party, which I thought was strange because Les didn't drink. And we hit it off pretty well, and John said that if you ever think about buying a horse, you should talk to Les. My only interest in racing prior to meeting Les was that I once on a Saturday, which happened to be Slipper Day, went to the races with Jack Ingham. Bob didn't go to the races in those days. And the incident of that was that Bob and Jack I had met the very first day I had arrived in Australia. I've recently moved to Sydney after living 4 years in Adelaide, and while there I bought a half interest in a filly through Colin Hayes, who was, I think they used to call him Sweet Lips or something. He was a very good salesman, and I wasn't sure what to do with this horse, so I sold a half interest to a friend of mine who was a quarter horse enthusiast. And so I ended up racing quarter horses in the, I think from the about 75 to 1979 or thereabouts when I met Les. At the cocktail party, John and Trish had said that, as I mentioned previously, that if I was ever thinking about buying another horse, I should talk to Les. So I remembered that. And I gave Les a call because I knew nothing, as I said, and I was going to the Adelaide. First of all, I had a lot of restaurants in Adelaide. I think at one stage 29 restaurants. So I was keen to invest back in the South Australian community. And so somehow the idea of buying a horse was a worthy way to give back. So I ended up. Les bought 5 yearlings at the Adelaide sales for me that year, 1979. All 5 won. One of them was November Rain, who we had bought from the, she was by a Staminet, bought out of the Lindsay Park draft. She won, can't remember how many races she actually won, but she won 3 Oaks. And having paid $11,000 for her, I promptly sold her to John Massara for $500. and I'm thinking to myself, hey, listen, this is unbelievable. What a phenomenal business this must be. So I'm saying, I'm still not taking any credit though. For those of you who know me, who have ever seen me at a sale, it would only be with Les. And I never, ever selected, sorry, I did select one once, but I really only ever by accident. So the, if I'm speaking too long, please let me know, but around this time, Les asked me to have a look at a Bletchingly filly owned out of Dubbo in a drought. The paddock had no grass, much like today, presumably. And so he said, look, I said, I'm not going to Dubbo. And he said, look, I'll have her sent to Muskoka. And which he did. And this filly had an enormously disproportionate head to her body, and she was about that thick. Very, very fine filly. Anyway, we called her Emancipation. My racing partners and I had 3 friends who were racing partners. She won, I might not have the statistics right, some of you are much smarter at that as well, but I think she won 23 races out of about 29 starts, 6 Group 1s, and Neville, you trained her. She was an amazing filly. We didn't own her, incidentally. We leased her from Mark Huff and his family. The interesting thing was that we offered Mark, and this was 1985, we offered Mark $1 million for her to race her in California because Les thought that that was a good idea. The Huffs, for whatever reasons, decided not to take the money, which was fine. On another day at the Adelaide sales, he selected a colt for me called Handy Kroger, who was a Victorian and Queensland Derby winner, ran second in the AJC Derby that year. At the same sale, he also selected a gelding that was known as Color Page, cost $5,000 and won over 500 in those days. The amazing thing was that Les had this ability to select horses that most people wouldn't normally I don't think you'd even look at the pedigree page because they weren't flash in those days. There were many there were many other group or listed horses that he selected for us. And I'll just name a few because it's to his credit. Port Carling, trained by Tommy Smith, ran 5th in the Melbourne Cup. Hit It Benny, Imperial Baron, ran 3rd in a slipper. Sea Pictures, interesting story there because we actually, I think I ended up buying half of Sea Pictures' sire called Roll, and with Phil Redmond, and that was at Les's suggestion. Phil was a much more successful horse person than I will ever be, and so that was the reason I mentioned it, because the only horse that I can recall ever winning by Roll was Sea Pictures, so I think that was quite interesting. Another filly called Bravery, who we, I think, sold to Transmedia, Michael Willesee, can't remember. Biddy's here today, and she was a partner in that. Filly called Dreams Delight, Glory Girl, Diamond Shower, great story, Diamond Shower. Les came to me one day, she was a very good filly. I think a multiple Group 1 winner, but a good filly. Les called me and said, you won't believe this, but we just got an offer for $1 million for this filly from the US. And I said, okay, where do we collect the money? You know, just pay us the money. I'm out of it. So anyway, he said, well, we got to get, so let's see what Cliffy says. Cliff and I were equal partners. So Cliffy said, I don't want to sell. And I said, well, that's fine, Cliff. Just send a check around on Monday for $500 and she's yours. So you wouldn't believe this, but Les said, I don't think he's going to do this. Anyway, the check arrived. I got the 500. Cliffy kept Diamond Shower, who was later sold for a whole lot less, I can tell you. We had a very good gelding called River Hero, and then another good horse called Iron Horse. Iron Horse is another Les special. We went to the Transmedia, Mike Willesee dispersal, and there was this gelding there by who was he by? And, no. No. I'll think of it in a minute. I should have written it down. Anyway, we paid $25,000 for him as a weanling. I said he was a gelding. We might have been, we gelded it. Anyway, won more than $1 million. So, and Les was very keen on this horse, and the reason I can tell you that was that my principle of buying a horse is let's put a price on it, Les, and no matter how clever we all are, someone may want to pay more. So let's put, I think I said 15 grand on it, on this weanling. And Les said, you know what, I think we should have, and I would always allow one more bet. So if it went from 15 to 17 or 17.5, whatever it was, I'd say, that's it, game over. Les was really persistent on this horse. We called him Iron Horse, and he won. We raced him in what I was doing at the time called the Lone Star Racing Syndicate, and he won more than $1 million. So thank God for Les. But there were some other stories that you might enjoy, and as I said, I might be going on too long. So Muskoka Farm was bought in '69, and I bought it with no idea what I was going to do with it. In 1979, when I met Les, I decided to convert it to a thoroughbred training center, pre-training center, training center. Les also introduced, I was in the food business at the time, and I knew a lot of the early McDonald's franchisees, although that wasn't my business. And I introduced some of them to Les, and Les, they formed a syndicate. Les managed it, called the OPMAC Syndicate. And the reason I mention that is because Frank Tagg, who has had a successful career in thoroughbred racing at one stage, Les selected Circles of Gold. And for those of you who know more than I do, she was a fabulous mare. The other remarkable story about Les was Bletchingley. Bletchingley had been the leading sire in Australia, I think 2, maybe 3 times, can't remember. And I said to Les one day, who owns Bletchingley? What's the story of Bletchingley? And he said, oh, an old guy. And when you get to my age, he wasn't that old, but he was 90. And so Elf Ellison, sorry, Stanley Wootton owned him, but Elf Ellison managed him. And so I said to Les, I want to meet Stanley Wootton. And he said, well, he lives in the UK and he comes to Australia occasionally. And I said, well, I want to meet him. I'd like to try to buy Bletchingley. And if the guy's 90, surely, to hell, a fair offer might be reasonable. So anyway, Les arranged this. Les was the front man in my horse life. So he called, actually he called Catherine, I think, Catherine Ramon, and said, look, my associate wants to meet Stanley Wootton. What does he want to meet for? He wants to buy Bletchingley. Well, Bletchingley's not for sale. And I said, well, Les, I still would like to go. So off we went to, and Stanley lived in Randwick somewhere, and we sat down and had Catherine made tea. And Stanley said, and what can I do for you? And I said, Mr. Wootton, I said, you know, I have an interest in horses these days, and I would like to know if you would sell Bletchingley. And he said, no way. Wouldn't sell it in a fit. So I said, okay, fine. And this took an hour probably, chatting back and forth and whatever. And I did try to say in the nicest possible way, well, you know, you're not getting any younger, and surely, you know, you might want to manage your estate. So anyway, some time went by, maybe a month, and I called Les and I said, Les, you know, I want to see Stanley Wootton again because I didn't listen to what he said. He said he didn't want to sell the horse. So Les said, well, I don't think Elf is going to give you another meeting, you know. So anyway, to make a long story short, I got another meeting with Stanley Wooten, and I said, Mr. Wooten, I apologize for not listening to what you said. You said you didn't want to sell the horse, and I'm here. I don't want to buy him. But you also told me you own 17 shares in the horse, and I'd like to lease those shares and prepay the rights for those horses for 5 years. And I wrote him a check. He accepted. I couldn't believe it. So he accepted that he still owned the horse, had income from the horse. Anyway, that led to another negotiation I had with George Ryder. And George at the time owned Arabs, the Australian Racing and Breeding Stables. And I actually ended up making I acquired those shares from George. They were publicly held, and George wasn't happy about it, but anyway, that's kind of what happened. And I then put the 17 shares in Bletchingley in the Australian Racing and Breeding Stables and sold it to John Massara. And Massara then changed the name to Airfield. So that's kind of the long story of Airfield. And Les was totally involved in all the discussions, all the negotiations, and was the front man in any discussions I had with any of them. The other major story that Les was involved with me was Nebo Lodge. Excuse me, Nebo Lodge. The Nebo Lodge story was also equally interesting in that Millie, I had only met Stan Fox once at the Adelaide sales. He was a big buyer. I think he owned 400 horses, so having started with one. Kind of reminds me of myself. Not necessarily. I think the story was that it was Millie's 65th birthday, and he said, what do you want for your birthday? And she said, I'd love an interest in a horse. And 400 horses later, Stan Fox had the biggest racing operation in the country. Met him once, and in Adelaide, nice gentleman. Unfortunately, he passed away shortly after I met him. And one day I said to Les, you know, we have Muskoka, and it's going really well. I'd love to have a city racing stable. I'd like to buy one. And he said, well, why would you want to buy one? And I said, well, I just would prefer to own my own. I owned a lot of real estate in those days. So I ended up buying Nebo Lodge from Millie. And that was a protracted negotiation because Millie was concerned that her husband, Stan, would not have wanted her to sell it. So I said, what was Stan's dream? And she said it was to win the premiership, the Sydney premiership. So I said, look, one of the things, I'm not good at horses, but I'm reasonably okay at management. So I said, let's manage our way through this thing. And I said, I've just found a person called Robert Sangster, who I cold called while he was in Melbourne, and said, I've just bought a stable in Sydney, I want to do it up, and I know you're represented by Colin doing a great job in Adelaide and Melbourne, but you should be in Sydney. So he said, I'll do that. That's the short version, but I'll buy it with you. And I said, okay, fine, you get 49%. He said, I don't own 49% of anything. He said, why would I do that? And I said, because of management. Someone's going to have the management, and management should always have a greater portion than you do if possible. And anyway, that was Nebo Lodge. We won the premiership the very first year we put it together. We won it the second year and the third year, and Tommy won it back. Blandford Park, I once, through Les, ended up owning I think it was a 50%, I don't know. I owned half the shares in what was then called Blandford Park, which eventually became Emirates, Nasser Luto. And that was all managed by a guy called Bob Bland and others. And I was briefly in it. Twig Moss was the leading sire of the time. He was standing there, I think he was the leading sire for 3 seasons. So my life in the horse business was always through Les. brings me to the next. I said to him one day, look, the governor of Kentucky is a very good friend of mine, and I think if we go to Kentucky, we would be well received. And so we did, and we went to Claiborne, Spendthrift, and Calumet farms and had to look at what they were doing and how they were doing it and why they were doing it. And Les said, anyway, and we went to Kentucky Derby. So then Les said to me something. He said, you know, there's a horse you should have a look at. He's getting a bit old, but you know, he's not doing a lot in Florida. A horse called No Home. And No Home, as many of you know more than I do, was a very, very great family. And so we flew to Florida, had a look at No Home, and I think he was 17. Anyway, we made an offer to buy him. And so I said to Les, well, you know, I'd like to know before we leave the U.S. because we'd have some things to do. So anyway, what happened was Les called me later, because I think Les went home. I stayed in Kentucky for a few days. And Les said, you won't believe this, but Robert Holmescourt was there the day before we were, and Robert bought the horse and he's taking him back to WA. So that's what happened, all with Les. I guess the most memorable trip with Les was to Japan in I think it was about 85. Les, I wanted to see the Japanese, their industry was, they were buying all the major stallions around the world at the time. Wanted to see what their training operation was like. And so I took Brian Mayfield Smith, Treve Williams, Reg Inglis, and myself, and we flew to Hokkaido and stopped along and looked at the training center, Miho training centers, and the various training centers. And the reason that was significant was actually a personal thing, and that was that we went out one night to a karaoke bar, and the most memorable part, well, I couldn't get Les to stand up and sing, but Brian Mayfield Smith did. And if any of you know Brian Mayfield Smith, the chance of him singing at a karaoke bar would be 10 zillion to 1. And anyway, Les couldn't get over that. Les laughed for a month over that. Les was also very involved in a company that I started called Mitavite. We call it the Australian Feed Company, and the products were Mitavite. I started it because my background was food and performance. I always try to be better tomorrow than I was today. And because Tommy Smith and Neville and Bart, and they all trained horses for me at one time or another, and I always used to hear, and I can remember what Neville would say, we feed the best. And I know that everything that every trainer of substance does is feed really well. But I noticed that they were all different. And I thought, you know, coming from a food background, I think I might be able to do this a bit better. So I said to Les, I need to find someone to run this thing for me, because one of the things I never did was run anything. So Les said, there's a guy called Sam Rutherford, and Sam lived on the Central Coast, and at the time I had a helicopter. We jumped in, and Brian Mayfield Smith, Les, and myself, the three of us and the pilot, 4 of us flew to Sam's place, and he was producing pelleted feed. And so I said to him, how many horses do you have here? And he said, 40. And I said, do they all get this feed? He said, yes, they do. And I said, has it made a difference? And he said, I think it has. And I said, could you feed 400 horses? And he stopped for a second and he said, you know, I'm not sure that I could do that. And I said, well, then my next question would be irrelevant, because I was going to ask you if you could feed 4,000 horses. Because we were looking for a new way to feed horses. To make a long story short, Treve, so I owned I owned 100% of it at this stage. I gave Sam 50%. As I did Les, I forgot to say that Doncaster Bloodstock was started back in the day, and I said to Les, I'll fund it, you run it, and after a while I just gave him the rest. With Sam Rutherford, I said to him, you take half, and I'll keep half. And Les said, I'm not sure I'd do that. And he said, I think this is going to be a good idea. Anyway, to make a long story short, we ran it at Muskoka for 3 years. And then after the 3rd year, I brought Bob and Jack Ingham up, who were the largest feed merchants in the country. And I said to Jack, Bob was very interested in the numbers, as he always was. And I said to them, look, I think this is worth doing. And so I sold half again to the Inghams, who eventually bought it all. And I think the last time Bob told me, they were selling 800,000 tons globally. And so Les was very instrumental in that early introduction and whatever. And Max referred to me as Lucky LaPointe. And now you know the reason. Les really was a winner, and I appreciate all he did for me.
The passing of Les Young marks the end of an era in many ways. He was one of the last great all-rounders that we're likely to see in this industry. Les turned his hand to many, many facets of the industry, and with great success, often at the highest level. He was a bloodstock agent with his Doncaster bloodstock. He conducted a yearling sale at one stage. He was an owner. He was a breeder. He was a pedigree authority. That was one of his great strengths. He was also a top-class journalist, which is where he became involved with us at Blue Bloods. And I think he was involved in racing administration at all sorts of levels. And last year he was made a life member of New South Wales Thoroughbred Breeders, which I think was a very fitting tribute to Les. I think Les did everything except ride and train the horses. He did it all with great success. And I think it'll probably surprise anyone from the X generation, and I'm looking around the room and I'm not sure I can see too many from the X generation, that Les did all this without Instagram, without Snapchat, without blogging. I don't think he ever took a selfie, and I doubt if he had an iPhone or an iPad. But he had a wealth of knowledge, and he knew how to apply it and be very successful in many ways in the industry. And not only was Les a success at all the top levels, but he also found time for people at all levels of the industry, for the small breeders, for the hobby breeders, for the people with a stallion that wasn't commercial, and he always found time for people at all walks of life in the industry. I know he was a long-term supporter of the Thoroughbred Breeders Club at Hawkesbury, and I can see a few of their members here today. When I first became involved in Blue Bloods in the 1980s with Brian Russell in what was then called the Australian Blood Horse Review, and Les was by that time very successful and what you would call a guru in the industry. A few years later, we were joined by Jennifer Churchill, and we decided that it was time to produce a different sort of stallion register for the Australian market. At that time, there was a very successful product called Sires, which was put out by Racetrack, and it was a great publication, but basically it was a big book of advertisements. No two entries were the same. So we decided to put out a stallion register where you could compare one horse to another, and we based it on the best features of the American, English, and especially the South African stallion register, the form register, which was a beautiful product, well illustrated and nicely set out. And we incorporated a few tweaks of our own. And it was a big undertaking and quite risky, and we were very anxious about the outcome. We got good support from breeders, and when the first volume was published in 1989, we received a glowing review from the guru, Les Young. He said it was a wonderful product and he was sure it would become the industry Bible. And I think that forecast proved largely correct. What I did, I rang Les and I asked him if we could use his quote in the marketing of the product for the future, and he agreed. I also asked Les if he would consider writing for Blue Bloods, or Australian Blood Horse Review as it was then, having been a long-term admirer of his articles on pedigrees, which are always well researched and well written. He told me that he had too many commitments at that time and he wouldn't be able to do it. So I was disappointed, but that's how things were. A couple of years later, he approached me again and he said, "Andrew, I wonder if you'd still be interested in me writing for Blue Bloods." He said, "I've got a little more time now and I've got a lot of horses and a lot of adjustment bills and I could use some extra money. I'd be happy to write for you." And I said, "Well, Les, I'm not sure if the amount I can afford to pay you is going to support a lot of horses, but I'd be delighted if you'd write for us." And so he became a contributor with his first series of articles called Behind the Names, and he's been writing for Blue Bloods ever since, over 30 years, something like that. And he's not only done one article, but some months more recently he's been doing a pedigree spotlight. He did articles on value broodmare sires, and I think in the last issue that he made 2 or 3 contributions to, that's going to press at the moment. It was great to work with Les. He was as reliable as clockwork, as many of you would know. Everything always came in on time, and better still, his work was well researched and it was beautifully presented. There were no misspellings, there were no apostrophes running around all over the place without homes, none where they shouldn't have been. Les's work was word perfect and it was letter perfect every time. It was one of the few things that we could send to press without checking. So we had a long and happy association over all those years. Every year when we produced the Stallion Register, in about April, Les used to ring me and he'd say, "Andrew, I'm just ringing to make sure you have all the first season sires going to stud on your records and are able to ring them." So we'd have a discussion, we'd compare notes, and that was very important because we didn't want to miss any, and often those people were anxious to get their horses in the book. And we did this every year. Les used to ring up, we'd compare notes, and at the last minute he'd send me an updated list of what horses were new and going to stud in a particular year. On another occasion, I was looking through the pedigrees of Group 1 winners, as many of us do, trying to see if I could learn something interesting. And I came across a fascinating pedigree of the AJC Oaks winner, Rena's Lady. And I looked at it carefully and I thought, boy, this is interesting. There's evidence of intelligent design here. Rena's Lady was one of the only 2 Group 1 winners by the Stallion Arena, and she was the only Group 1 winner out of a mare by Revocious, which was a stallion I had something to do with. And I thought it was a really clever pedigree. So a couple of weeks later, I'm talking to Les and I said, "Les, have you seen the pedigree of Rena's Lady? Somebody was very clever." And he said, "Thank you, Andrew. I designed that mating," which didn't surprise me. And to prove it was no fluke, I think the following year, her full sister Ray's was also a group performer at the carnival. Margaret and I used to enjoy Les's company. We'd catch up at various industry functions, at Stallion Open days, at race days, and Les was a regular at our Christmas lunch. He would make an excuse about every 5th year because there'd be a small sale on at Inglis's and work came first. But he became a great friend over the years. And Les could talk to you about any aspect of the industry knowledgeably, and he was always happy to pass on suggestions and the benefit of his advice and wisdom. And I think he did that for people at all levels of the industry. As I said before, he was happy to talk to people that were just a hobby breeder or with one mare. And I know in his write-ups in the Sportsman in the early days, he was just as likely to give a write-up to a new stallion going to stud for $500 as one for $50,000. It's most unusual these days for somebody to pass away with no immediate family and no living relatives. And I've heard it said that that's quite sad, but as we heard earlier today, it's not quite as sad as it sounds, because I think because of Les's passion for the industry and for the horses, the people here in this room and others in the industry were Les's family. And in closing, I'd just like to thank a few of the people who helped to ensure that Les wasn't left unattended for too long. And the ball was started by Ken Bowman, who made a phone call saying that the reliable as clockwork Les had missed a deadline sending something overseas. And I'd also like to thank Julianne Christopher, Hilma Else, Clive Alcock and Caroline Ceesay for helping to move things along and to get us here to where we are today. Les was a fantastic person, a great all-rounder. We'll probably never see his like again, and he'll be greatly missed.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack. We've all heard of the wonderful skills that Les had as a bloodstock agent. They've been acknowledged. I first met Les actually when we were on the opposite sides of an issue to do with Australian racing and breeding stables that Bob alluded to. But we very quickly found that we had very similar interests and passions, and started a friendship which has lasted for 35 years. We would have weekly email exchanges if we didn't see one another at the races. So I'm going to speak very briefly about two aspects of Les's life, just to round out the man. The first is the movies. Now, you may not know this, but Les was actually a very enthusiastic movie goer. His tastes were very eclectic. He would take in art house movies, he would take in thrillers. Through it all, though, he had a couple of strange passions. He really loved Woody Allen movies. Now, he'd often come to me and say, do you know there's a Woody Allen movie coming out, Clive? It's going to be out in 3 months' time. I'd say, well, no, I didn't, Les, but thank you for letting me know. And he would arrange to try and get to the first showing if he possibly could. But the quirkiest feature arising from this passion, and he developed a passion himself for Diane Keaton. Now, I'm a psychiatrist, and I had many sessions with Les trying to sort this one out at the races. I'm afraid I never could, and Les took that one with him. But that's just a little extra dimension of the man we know. The other area I'm going to focus on is his punting, because this overlaps in many ways with the skill that he showed as bloodstock agent. He was a small punter. There'd be no bookies trembling. I don't think there's any bookmakers here today. One of the reasons why they won't be trembling is that he never bet with them. He was a small punter on the place tote only. Occasionally a little win bet, but it would be the place tote only. Now, alluding to the movies and to Max, very often our first question at the races when the three of us would meet at a particular race hill would be not what are you going to bet on today, it would be what movies have you seen, we can start talking about those. But Les would never divulge what his horses were. His technique was to have a look at the form in great detail, and he would, the same thoroughness, the same keeping everything nicely ordered and flowing through. He would bet at Adelaide, he'd bet at Gold Coast, he'd bet at Kenmore, he'd bet at Sydney, he'd bet at Melbourne. Wherever he thought through his analysis there was a good horse. And the analysis often involved breeding, but it would also involve looking at the race thoroughly. He was very cautious about any race in which the favourite, and it was usually favourites he was betting on, had more than one or two opponents. And he would come to the races with a list of 11 possibles. And you say to him, well, how are you going to go with all of these? Les says, I want to have a look at them. And he would try and look at the horses in the birdcage if he could, or on television, and then he'd make a decision. He might like to look at them, so they're off the list. Or he would look at the betting. And what he hated was the horse coming in against one of his horses. He didn't mind his horse blowing out a wee bit, but he just would get very nervous and put a line through that and say, don't like the chances there. So we'd end up with 4 or 5 or 6 bets maybe in a day. And I would send out on Saturday night an email saying, usually, not such a good day, every now and again I could have a little boast. Then on Sunday he would write up his column, but he'd also reply to me. And having sort of seen him select the horses and knowing for a fact that he was betting on them, he would then tell me how he'd gone, and I would think very reliably, and he very rarely had a losing day. He was very astute. He would pick at very short-priced horses. $1.20 he would accept. Occasionally, of course, being a tote punter, he'd put his money on at $1.20, it would come to $1.10 or $1.04, and he'd accept that philosophically. We had a few jokes about the dreaded fourths, which is a place punter he would really hate. He nearly got there, but, you know. But if you're betting at $1.30, you have to get about 77% collects. If you're betting at $1.20, you've got to get about 84% collects to make a profit. He was pitching at those figures. I ever once only said to him, "What's the long-term picture, Les?" And to my surprise, he actually said, "Oh, I'll go and have a look." So he was obviously keeping records. And he bumped into me the next time. He said, "I looked over the last 6 months," and he said, "I have made a small profit." I don't think there'd be too many of us here today who could say that reliably about a random 6-month period, and keep your hands down. but that was the approach that he had. Very thorough, very methodical, and as Max noted in his column, the last email that I received was he was at home. He hadn't been able to get to the track because he had been being crook for a while. He'd had a bet in Newcastle, he'd had a bet in Victoria, he'd had a bet in Brisbane, and all of them were placed. But one final story, and then I will move on. He very rarely, as I said, would tell you to bet a horse. But this happened only once, and very recently. He phoned me about 2 months ago and said, "Clive, I think there's a horse you should be thinking of looking at." I said, "Les, goodness, what's happened here? Why? What's it all about?" He said, "Well, I've seen its overseas form. I think it's pretty good. I think it will measure up. I've seen it have one run here in Sydney, and I think it's going to be worth following." Well, we followed it for 2 bets after that, which both lost. The second one was a pretty good run. And then, of course, over the carnival, it came in. Yulong Prince. Some of you will probably remember that. It was a $10 winner and a $3.10 place better. I phoned Les right after the race to congratulate him on being a genius yet again. And I said, "But you should have had something on it to win, didn't you, Les?" He said, No, I stuck to my place betting. I kept it going. But it was a big do it. So he was very happy with that. Now, Yulong Prince is a 5-year-old, and of course it may go on to win more races. And if you do decide to bet on it and it wins, remember that you heard the tip here first. At that point, I should conclude by noting that I feel extremely privileged to have had Leslie Young as a part of my life. Thank you.
My association with Les is not nearly as long. It's only a fraction of the time that most of you have known him. But we were good and close friends, and we became so very gradually. For the first couple of years, it was just regular invitations to go out, and he was very nice and accommodating, and I enjoyed his company, so I accepted. And then after a time, it became a lot closer. We realised we had so much in common, and our lives became intertwined together. I'm going to read from notes because I'm not reliable otherwise on this occasion. As a person, Les was kind, gentlemanly and low-key, but a very interesting man to engage with, and surprisingly, to many of you, because he was quite a serious man, he frequently made me laugh. And that's a very endearing trait in a man as far as I'm concerned. It was often, sometimes I was laughing at Les, but he took it very well. Anyway, and sometimes one of us would say something that would trigger the ridiculous in us, and we'd both have a laugh, and that was really great. Not having any family himself, he always showed interest in mine, especially asking me about my 2 sons, of which one, my younger son Duncan, is here with me today to support me, and also my 2.5-year-old grandson. And sometimes he'd ring me on the day I minded him during the week and ask how things were going. And usually he was in the sandpit and wet, and I had to run off in no time at all because he was a very active boy, but Les was enjoying taking part in it remotely. One of the later excursions I had with him was to Coolmore Stud in August, and whilst there we met 2 young women who were just starting out in the racing industry, and Les spent quite a little bit of time trying to encourage them in the various aspects of their careers and giving them some guidance. And that too was very indicative of his caring nature. Yes, as Clive said, one of our shared interests was that of films, though he eschewed the foreign language films most often rather than going to them, which the ones I liked, a lot of the French films and so on. But our interests otherwise were pretty much parallel, so we were always able to find one that would appeal greatly or equally to both of us, and that became a regular part of our time together. Other times we shared a takeaway and a DVD at my place, and that was very comfortable too. No one's mentioned his politics. They were extremely right-wing, but we did share that interest, although I'm perhaps right-wing with a heart, I might like to call it. Where was that? Yes, he joined a political institute that I belonged to, so we often met there for the various meetings where we heard a great variety of speakers on many matters, political as well as others. And after that we'd often go off and share a meal somewhere and enjoy talking about all manner of things, including politics and putting the world to rights. However, breeding and racing were his chief interests, of course, as you have all said. And I was delighted to be reintroduced to that world, or to the world of racing, by him. I had gone to Flemington as a young girl in my late teens and early 20s with a girlfriend, taking advantage of her grandmother's membership tickets and enjoying as much the racing as enjoying as much the dressing up and planning of our hats as the racing, and the young men who were also attending. But my mother was an equestrian, a good rider, and she made sure that I'd learned to ride early, so I was interested in the horses as well. Once Les knew I was interested in the horses themselves, he opened up with his wealth of knowledge, but only in quite a conversational manner. Often I'd ask about a photo of a horse that was around at one of the venues, and he'd just come forth with all the details about the breeding of it, the progeny that it produced and the history that was produced from it and so on. Just extempore, just knew all those things so off by heart. Although admittedly I suppose they were noted winners if their photos were up, but he seemed to know a great deal about any horse I cared to ask about. I also asked to read his articles that he wrote because I found them very interesting. They were written with great skill and depth of knowledge, but were written so nicely that just they were of great interest to even somebody who was just an amateur and had an amateur interest in the industry as I. So we found each other to be stimulating company, and eventually each was woven into the lives of the other, with a much deeper relationship developing. It's a caring and loving relationship. Don't be nice to me, it'll make it worse. And it helped round out both our lives. I found him to be a very understating of his roles in the industry, and just happy that I was interested in what interested him. Of course, thoroughbred breeding and the racing industry were both his career and a consuming passion, as others have said. And they had not left much room for any other interest in his life. What a lucky man he was to be able to follow a career and combine that passion together. Not many people do that. How many of us live uninteresting lives wishing we were doing something else? And it was very fortunate for the industry too, for the talents and dedication he brought to it. I shall always remember Les as a kind, caring and loving, interesting and thoroughly decent man, a man of old school values, and I trust that I played a major part in the, sorry, I can't read this, enjoyment of his later years and in bringing him light and life to them, I shall very much miss you, Les, and my life shall be the poorer for your lack in it.
And when you leave here in a short while, I want you to leave here with a feeling of having, well, shared something very special, because he's a special guy, very special man. And hold on to Les, hold on to him in your thoughts, and talk about him often. Enjoy your memories of Les. It's almost that time where we take our final farewell, and we all make that transition from life with Les to life without him. And I guess today's farewell, in the last hour and a bit, is just a small piece of time where we've all come together, haven't we, to remember and pay tribute to Les Young. I think the real tributes will play out over the many years of telling stories and sharing memories of him too. And maybe a little plaque somewhere around here with his name on it to keep a permanent memory out there too. Today in grief of his death, but also in gratitude of his life and that special privilege you've all had of sharing in it, we'll be saying goodbye to him soon. We do give thanks for his life and for the many, many years of friendship shared. If you're able to, could you kindly stand as I say our last words of farewell? Today and always, we just hope and pray that loving memories bring you peace, everyone. Also bring you comfort and strength too. Tenderly and lovingly and reverently, we'll commit the spirit and body of Les Young to a more peaceful place. Shortly, into the darkness and warmth of the earth, we will lay him down. So into the sadness and smiles of our memories, we will lay him down. May we now say farewell. And may you rest in peace, Les. We thank you for the good times and for your hard work. And thank you for your love and laughter. And thank you for just being you. With great respect, we bid you that final farewell. Continue your journey, Les, with the love of everyone here. And be reunited with family and friends gone before you. Les, and I think everyone agrees, you will live on in the hearts of everyone you touched and nurtured too while you lived here on this earth. And you know one thing, I guess holding the thoughts of Les in your hearts means that death never ends a life, but never a relationship. You'll always have that. It's now time to commit your physical body to the earthly elements. May perpetual light shine upon you. May you rest in peace. And we do leave you now in peace. So many here are grateful to have you in their lives. Now, we don't want to end it on a sad note. You loved horses all your life. Can we just turn this little bit of music up and give him a round of applause as we escort Les on that final run?